Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone joining this IEA Bioenergy webinar, where we have this triennial conference presenting the results from IEA Bioenergy. I think this has been a very interesting 2 weeks where we have been able to look at a lot of different webinars with a lot of different information and where we all got updated. I was really excited to see all the new items that were there and also the very new messages that came out and also the insights that we got on the potentials and also on the opportunities to, let's say, explore and also develop and implement bioenergy. So today, this is the last part of the seminar. It's session 14. And we are now coming to a conclusion because we're now looking how can all this information that we have gathered over the last weeks, how can we use that to transform let's say, our energy system in such a way that we can realize carbon neutrality. And each country will do that in its own very specific way. And so what we see is that we have today 6 different countries, 3 European countries and 3 countries outside Europe. And we will all have our different opportunities and we can all realize this in a different way. So it will be interesting to see what comes out of this discussion today. So the way we will do is as follows. First, Luc Belkman will give a presentation about, let's say, the results so far. After that, we will go to the 6 different countries. And during, let's say, these presentations, we will also launch a poll. 3 times there will be a poll where you can also put in your answers on these questions so that we can use that also for the discussion. Because in the final discussion, we will look into, okay, what are the different issues? How can we solve the problems? But also, how can IEA Bioenergy help the different countries in realizing the solutions? So besides the polls, there is also the Q&A button where you can put your questions. And we will use this Q&A to look at the different questions that are there so that later on in the panel discussion, we can come back to these questions. So you can chat, but we will not look in the chat. We will look in the Q&A for the questions that are there. And after the meeting, you can also go to the wonder.we website where we can still continue our discussion on, well, the different items that are there and we can discuss with each other. So everyone, most welcome to this webinar today. And the first speaker will be Luc Belkmans, our technical coordinator, who has already been with IEA Bioenergy for a number of years, and who will give the results that we have achieved the last weeks from the different webinars. So Luc, the floor is for you.
Okay, thank you, Kees. Can you see my screen?
Yes. Can you put it on full screen mode? Yes. So now it's perfect.
Okay, great. So thanks, Kees. Thanks for the introduction. And I'm really happy to present you the highlights of the Trianium conference that we had so far from the past 2 weeks. We had 14 sessions. So spread over these weeks, we deliberately didn't put an overloaded agenda. So we put like 2 sessions per day. So it was still possible to combine it with day jobs. And also we kind of spread the timings that we could also have global participation. So you see the sessions here. And here you see all the panels that we had so far. I think last picture will be from this panel also that I will include here. But you see a lot of faces. You see all them all together per day, an opening panel, 2 panels on feedstock mobilization and sustainability, 2 panels on transport biofuels, 2 on green gas. We had an industry panel last Friday, which was also very interesting. 2 panels on circular economy and industry. Then on Tuesday, bioenergy in the energy system. And then last night, we already had a closing panel for Asia, Oceania and North America. So this one is really focused on on Europe, on South America and Africa and India. So big thanks to all these people, all the moderators, all the speakers and the panelists. So it worked really well. And also thanks to the audience for participating and for providing very interesting input also to the Q&A. Looking back with the first figures that we have, we've seen that more than 1,100 people have attended one or more of the conference sessions. So I think that's impressive. Also from around 90 countries around the globe. So this is a real global participation, which is really good. If you look at the sessions separately, there had been between 150 and 400 live participants. And we also noticed that several people watched the recordings of these sessions, which are available at the session pages. So going to do highlights. So I try to summarize some of the points that I try to, that's good to remember also. Of course, there's quite a lot to remember, but just try to put it in a few categories and bullet points. First, about the energy transition, which was discussed also in the opening panel, but also frequently in other sessions as well. And what's really important is that we really need an unprecedented transformation of the energy system to reach net zero CO2 emissions. So that's something that everybody needs to realize. We need a portfolio of options and there's no silver bullet. So we can't do it with some popular solutions. We don't have the luxury to dismiss good options which also can contribute. And in that sense, bioenergy's role is also very important in the scenario from IEA for net zero emissions by 2050. The role of bioenergy is around 20% of total energy supply, so that's pretty substantial. And we also have to see that the role of biomass will evolve in the coming decades towards sectors which are hard to abate and difficult to electrify. So that role is very important. Coming from IPC, the message also is that CO2 removal from the atmosphere will be absolutely necessary to limit global warming, and bioenergy in combination with carbon capture and storage is one of the critical CDR options. Now, if you look at the evolutions, are we on track for this net zero emission scenario? For most options, we are not on track. I think from all the technologies that IEA put forward, about 45 or something, only 2 are on track. And also bioenergy really needs a strong boost to get on track. And so we need urgent, strong and credible policy actions from governments also. And we really need to attract investments at scale and foster innovation that is also required. Now, a very positive point, I think, is that the transition is now clearly accelerating. We've also seen it in the industry panel that we had on Friday, is that the companies and the sector ambitions in terms of the goals, decarbonization goals, are really growing fast. So companies and sectors are starting to realize, and their focus is now also to move from these ambitions, from these roadmaps, to how they can handle this transition in practice. Very good reflection, and there is growing recognition also in industries that we need to look beyond what feels simple, like sun and wind, which can't solve everything. So we need to have a broad picture there. What was also put in that session was that in transition periods, companies are vulnerable. So companies need to make very large investments to make this transition. For that, I need a stable policy framework, also a long-term stability, and also protecting from carbon leakage, so that we avoid that production is just shifting to countries which have laxer emission constraints. So that's pretty important. Everything starts, of course, from biomass mobilization. So the whole bioeconomy, bioenergy sector really drives on, where can we mobilize biomass? We see a higher move to low value and underutilized heterogeneous biomass resources. So far it was more about cleaner wood chips, wood pellets, or also crops that we know. But we have to broaden this and looking at more low value sources as well. Agricultural residues are very important in different parts of the world, particularly in Asia, where we had the panel last night, where a lot of straw is still burnt on the field. And this is really something, if we can stop that, if we can do something else with this straw, we also help air pollution, reducing air quality problems. In terms of feedstock, you always start from local and usually very dispersed biomass, and you have to connect that with central processing. Certainly, if you want to go to these difficult to abate sectors with biofuels at large scale and things like that. So you need to make this connection. We had a session on biohubs, particularly, which are kind of regional biomass depots, which can make this connection. So they have providing kind of a centralized or a regional intermediate storage. They can provide also pretreatment to tradable commodities, which can then make the connection with the larger scale conversion. And this also adds value to the residues and allows for income diversification of farmers and smaller companies. And it's difficult from the final sector, the end user sector, to contract all these farmers and small players separately. So it's good to have intermediate companies there. Going to another very important point is sustainability governance, which is also crucial for the acceptance of biomass and bioenergy. A very important message there was you shouldn't consider bioenergy in isolation. Bioenergy is part of a broader bioeconomy, which is also shown in the picture on the right there. So it's part of production systems in agriculture, in forestry, but in most of the case, it's really running on residues, and you have main products which are driving thing. In sustainability, you need to consider the sustainability goals. This actually, you have to look beyond energy and climate benefits. There's also co-benefits next to that. Well, in IE Bioenergy, they've looked into a number of practices, and the good practices of bioenergy really show multiple co-benefits, like rural development, like improving air quality. Those are things that, and reducing waste issues. Those are things that we also need to bring forward. So there's synergies. There's also trade-offs in some cases, for instance, biodiversity, and these also have to be considered. There's more work needed on global and regional sustainable biomass availability, and also how the sustainability governance in practice is working. And this is really required to de-risk companies that want to make investments in the bioeconomy. And BioFuture platform is also initiating a work stream in that sense. There's still a high debate on the climate impacts of using forest biomass for energy. We see a lot of papers also appearing there. But problem is also that there can be issues with system boundaries, with different counterfactuals that they use. So it's really to come to proper system boundaries and counterfactuals. But I would like to call everybody to also attend a webinar that's organized together with ET Bioenergy and the Swedish company F3 on Friday. So really welcome to attend, and registration for that event is still open. We had a full day on transport biofuels. We see in transport biofuels, which was so far mainly focused on the road transport sector, we now see a gradual shift to difficult to electrify sectors like aviation or marine. Although we still have to recognize that for short-term displacement of fossil fuels in the road transport, we also need replacements of those fossil fuels. So it's not only about electricity, but you also have a transition period of at least 10 or 20 years, because cars which are now sold, which are still largely based on combustion engines, they will still be running for another 10, 15 years normally. And you also have heavy duty, which is taking much longer. A lot is moving in aviation and marine markets. And particularly in aviation, things are really starting to accelerate, and sustainable aviation fuels are considered as really as the cornerstone of aviation decarbonization, which would be representing around 65% of the greenhouse gas emissions that they need to reduce. So really an important component. Very promising also is that the oil refining sector, so the petroleum refiner, also recognizes the need to transform it, to move away from fossil fuels. That's really promising. And in terms of policy, what we see in the markets is that, well, in the past 10, 15 years, we mainly had volume mandates to blend a certain amount of biofuels in diesel and gasoline markets. But these are now kind of shifting to greenhouse gas emission reduction mandates, which I think is a very positive trend also. Important there is that you have good tools, good LCA tools, credible tools with good background data to support that. And certification of feedstocks and biofuel pathways are also a very good tool to monitor compliance with different requirements. In terms of green gas, we're talking about biogas, which is used as such, or also biomethane, or renewable hydrogen, or synthetic methane also as an e-fuel. Now, if we look at the markets, the gas markets and the electricity markets, like in the European Union and the US, the energy which is coming from the gas grid is about 2 times bigger than the energy coming from the power grid. So fossil gas replacement really needs much more attention than we have now. Biomethane is fully compatible with this gas infrastructure and can be one of the major components to decarbonize the gas system. Also, of course, you also need to reduce the gas consumption, but also replacing part of that. So biomethane can be produced from upgraded biogas, from anaerobic digestion, or through gasification of solid biomass, which is gaining attention with the methane synthesis, or also from combining hydrogen and CO2 to e-methane. Very important for biogas and anaerobic digestion systems is that they have a lot of things more than just producing energy. So they can avoid methane leaching, which can be from actually from bio waste, which is degrading. So you can substitute fossil fuel, but you can also substitute chemical fertilizers with the byproduct, and you can also increase the soil carbon content if you have a good feedback with the digestate or biochar. So there's and there was also some attention for emerging economies also in these sessions. There's multiple benefits to use farm livestock waste, household waste for biogas, but there was also a call to have capacity building and training in rural areas so you have a good operation of these biogas installations. And we also need international collaboration, because in this sense, this is a really good opportunity to reduce methane emissions in many parts of the world, which is also part of the COP agreement to do that. So countries need to help each other in that.
Luc, 2 minutes left.
Oh, okay. A little faster then. So we had 2 sessions on circular economy and biorefining. In terms of waste, we see that processing of waste is not only about incineration with energy recovery anymore, but we really see promising pathways of chemical recycling via gasification or liquefaction. Another point we have to highlight is industrial symbiosis, so exchanging residues and energy flows between companies, which has a lot of advantages in terms of economics, energetics, and environmental advantages, but it should be enabled by local municipalities. Biorefineries stay important, but we also need policies to transform the market environment for biorefineries, particularly in terms of bioproducts, which at the moment are not really incentivized. So you need to kind of mechanisms like CO2 taxation. In terms of renewable heat, which for industry was mainly about the processing industries of forest products and agricultural products, which use their own process residues. But we now also see other industries to consider replacing their fossil fuel consumption like that. And there's also a move to the more challenging fuels with the higher ash content compared to the clean fuels, as I mentioned before. A big attention still is residential wood combustion, which is still an important source of particulate matter emissions and health issues. So it's really important to analyze efficient emission reduction strategies, and different countries have implemented measures on that, and we also have to learn from each other. And the last point here, so we had the last session on Tuesday was the contribution of bioenergy to low carbon energy systems. Actually, 2 important characteristics come really prominent from bioenergy. It's one, you need flexibility in an energy mix or electricity mix dominated by wind and solar. And you also need negative emissions, and bio-CCS is a very important asset for that. In terms of flexibility, there's long-term flexibility, which can be provided by bioenergy, which is seasonal heat demand, or you can also upgrade biomass to storable renewable fuels. On the other hand, you have short-term flexibility systems, which is services, which is more about balancing the electricity system with increasing variable renewables. But important there is that you need to have value for these flexibility services. So it's not just a matter of looking at what's the euro or the dollar per megawatt or hour cost of what you produce, but there's also flexibility value. And the last point, green hydrogen is also being pushed quite a lot in different markets. And we see a lot of potential interactions and synergies between bioenergy and green hydrogen. Like hydrogen can be injected in the process to increase the amount of output, biofuels output, or you can use the biogenic CO2 from a bioenergy process to combine with hydrogen to make e-fuels. So that's really things on the horizon. So final message, I hope you enjoyed the conference sessions and all presentations, recordings, the session highlights also. So we have a number of summary points, as well as the poll results are also available at the session pages or will be in 1 or 2 days. And the conference page will be open. So thanks for your attention and also thanks for participating in this conference. Going back to you, Kees.
Luc, thank you very much for this excellent overview on what we have done and also what has been achieved. So this is really very useful. I would suggest that the questions, we will keep that till we come to the panel session, so we'll not go into that at this moment. Your presentation clearly showed the opportunities that there are for bioenergy as part of the overall transformation in the energy system. So let's first have a look now at the first poll, because we would like to know from all the people who are, let's say, in this session, where do you think, let's say, in which sector do you think that the highest market expansion of biomass could take place? So there is a choice between different markets, and where do you think within the next decade most activity will take place? So that's for you to fill in this questionnaire while we will continue with the next presentation. The next presentation will be by Renato Godinho. He is the head of the division for new and renewable energy resources at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Brazil, and is very active from this Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the bioenergy area. And together with colleagues, he has made a nice presentation about, let's say, the bioenergy developments in Brazil. So Renato, the floor is yours. Could you give your presentation?
Thank you very much, Kees. I'm very pleased to be here. Let me share my screen to start the presentation. Okay, I think it's good to go. After this overview by Luc on all that has transpired, so many exciting debates here in the conference, I'm pleased to go on for the Brazilian perspective on, and I think it aligns with much of what has been said by Luc on this transformation and how we have been in Brazil quantifying the potential of biomass and what actions are needed to bring that potential to realization. So I'd like first to give proper credits to many of the charts and graphics and numbers in this presentation to the Energy Planning Agency in Brazil. They're extremely competent officers that work hard in order to put the perspectives into quantifiable terms, and the Ministry of Mines and Energy as well, and the Department of Biofuels. So I want to start briefly with an overview of the full Brazilian energy balance. As many of you know, Brazil is remarkably ahead of most other large economies on its renewable energy mix. So we have fully 48.4% of total energy mix. I'm not talking about the power sector, but the full energy mix in Brazil being 48.4% renewable, and the largest responsible source for this result is biomass. So especially sugarcane biomass, but also other renewables, wood and vegetable coal, all of them put together provide the second largest source of energy for the whole country, second just to petroleum. And indeed more than hydropower, for which Brazil is also well known, and it's really important in our power matrix. But then when you look at the whole picture together, one thing that surprises many is that biomass is really the most important renewable source, advanced sustainable biomass by far in Brazil. And this leads to a per capita emissions in the country. One of the factors for it being so low, you can see 1.9 tons of CO2 per person in Brazil, as compared, as you can see in the chart, to the United States, China, and European Union. So in the transport sector, specifically, as has been mentioned there, you can see the growth historical overview of how the biofuels have been more and more present in the transportation sector so far. Now there is 25.8% participation in the transport sector, which I think is perhaps the highest share that it can be observed in the whole world for the transport sector. And now let's look into the future. And this is coming from the forecast for the PDE, the Energy Development Plan in Brazil for 2030. You can see here that the consumption by source of the many different sources of biomass is poised to grow. Biodiesel 5.8% a year. Hydrous ethanol will get also an increase due to the consumption of pure ethanol in the auto cycle vehicles, even while the whole consumptions of auto cycle vehicles and gasoline as a whole is going to get down. But the participation of ethanol in that whole cycle will compensate for that, and we achieve a growth of participation of ethanol in the fuel mix. So bioelectricity is also standing to grow significantly over this decade. So you can see there ethanol sugar production is going to increase, and therefore the bioelectricity that is made out of that biomass. When you say here exportation, this means the surplus electricity being generated in the mills that can be exported to the power grid. So it is not related to exportation to other countries, but exportation out of the mill, the energy that is used in the conversion process itself, but the surplus energy being sold into the grid, we will see a significant increase as well. It's still below the technical potential that you can see in the right graph in the red line. So there's still more to grow, more room to grow. So there are also estimates for increase in other biofuels in this decade with biogas, which is being called the pre-salt, the farm-based pre-salt in Brazil. Pre-salt, as you know, is the layer where oil has been discovered in Brazil in large quantities, and we have almost an equivalent amount of energy potential in the biogas being generated from residues in Brazil, all of the country, and this biogas revolution is just starting and has a lot to go. Green diesel regulation is being introduced for this new fuel that is not currently used in Brazil, and bio-KAV or biokerosene for aviation is expected to reach 1% of total aviation fuel demand in Brazil by 2030. A brief look on the perspectives of longer-term perspectives from the National Energy Plan for 2050. This is a plan that has still some more assumptions to discuss. Here's the Biomass Roadmap. You can see the major innovations and technologies expected that lies as assumptions for how much we expect biomass to grow. And much of it, you can see in the chart, relates to more precision agriculture, a more efficient use of the biomass, the residues that are there in the field, and personalized enzymes, finally, for optimized for specific biomasses, and the recovery of residues, and a lot of it has also to do with what I said, the biogas revolution in the field, that will probably biogas be an intrinsic part of agriculture in Brazil. So the biogas generation would be seen as paired with any kind of agricultural production in Brazil going to the future. So this is these are the assumptions that underlie this picture here, where you can see there is a 2.5 projected increase in biomass production for energy use from 2015 to 2050. And I should stress that almost all of it is an increase that is projected to happen without any expansion of the agricultural frontier or the amount of land devoted to agriculture. So this all resides from this better yields and more efficient use of the land and the biomass that is grown in the field, along with the use of residues overall. So you can see there is a huge increase, and most of it is responsible, the responsibility. So we can be thankful for the use of agricultural residues in the form of biogas, especially. Increasing a lot with their share for energy use. This is a graph. I included it. It is an interesting. This is an interesting picture as well, an infographic that is not coming from our national plan, but it's an independent study by RSB and Agroecon in Brazil, estimating the potential for SAF in Brazil. And it must be said that this study excluded the pathways that are related to soybeans. So even excluding those pathways from the potential estimation, they came to the conclusion that there is potential for close to 9 billion liters of SAF in Brazil based on these different biomasses, and especially sugarcane residues by the ATJ alcohol to jet technological pathway. And this is more than sufficient to satisfy all possible demand for a SAF mandate in Brazil, even if it reaches 50% of the whole country demand, and more than enough to provide exports to help decarbonize the aviation sector worldwide. So how to bring this about, and I'm reaching the end of the presentation, we are convinced that we need to unlock this potential with a new generation of smart policies. And chief among them is RenovaBio, which was fully implemented in 2020. It creates a market for emissions reductions based on biofuels, and this is being expanded to include other forms of sustainable mobility. So it would be fully integrated, including with advancements in energy efficiency in vehicles. So we can integrate the fuels part with the in-vehicle part and provide this comparison, apples to apples comparison in terms of full life cycle analysis of emissions reductions in transport. Instead of focusing on specific technologies, we can compare them all based on the life cycle and provide the proper incentive, a proper value to the emissions reductions in the market. So we believe this as to be the right approach that can contemplate all the technologies together, and instead of supposing zero emission in vehicles, when actually over the whole life cycle, they wouldn't be zero emissions at all. So this allows policymakers and the market itself to regulate based on cost factors and others, while ensuring sustainability requirements and certification for all the participants in this carbon emissions reductions markets created by RenovaBio, and the ever diminishing, so more and more ambitious targets for the intensity of carbon in the transport matrix. This is what I mentioned. Sorry, I'm just have one more slide to go. This is an overview of the long-term target for the average carbon intensity of the fuel mix that RenovaBio mandates. So the mandate is not a blending share, not technology, it's reducing the carbon intensity of the fuel mix in Brazil. These are the expected dynamics of RenovaBio. So the search for more efficiency, so and the larger introduction of bioenergy in the whole energy matrix, not only quantity but quality, because the better carbon footprint, there is an embedded economic incentive, so more incentives for investments in quality. We are not stopping there. So the next step is the Future Fuels program, because RenovaBio is technology neutral. We realize there needs to be specific incentives to bring to market new fuels, new technologies, new pathways, where RenovaBio's incentives wouldn't be enough for them to be introduced. So these are being discussed in interministerial groups and consultations with the public over lots of new pathways and technologies, some for the auto cycle, the diesel cycle, how to implement bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, SAF, fuels for the maritime fuels, synthetic fuels, and research, development, and innovation. This is all ongoing, and we have a firm government mandated deadline for July 2022 next year for the proposals for concrete policy instruments to be finalized. So sorry for trying to bring so much information here for you, but we had a lot to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Renato, for this overview of what's going on in Brazil, and also your, let's say, progressive approach towards bioenergy and everything that has been achieved. Without, let's say, having a further, let's say, discussions, I would like to continue now with the next presentation from the south. So this is Barry Bredenkamp, who is the General Manager Energy Efficiency at Synergies. And Synergies is the South African National Energy Development Institute. So they are also a partner within IEA Bioenergy. And Barry will explain to us how bioenergy can develop in South Africa. So the floor is to you, Barry.
Thank you very much, Program Director, and good day to everyone, and from South Africa, good afternoon to everyone on this platform. It is always a hard act to follow if you have to do a presentation on biomass straight after a country like Brazil, where biomass and biofuels, as we've just seen in the presentation, are really at the forefront of development. Strangely enough, South Africa as a developing country has not really embraced biomass to a great extent. There are activities happening, but due to South Africa having this vision of universal access to grid electricity for many years as a political statement, biomass has not been top of the agenda, and you'll see my presentation why, but that is changing, and we're hoping for some developments. So just to put it into context, South Africa is a water-stressed country. So unlike Brazil, we do not have lots of hydropower. We are a water-scarce country. Government has made it quite clear in terms of food security that crops cannot be used for energy, and that's not an option. But we have found in our research and the work that has been done to date that waste to energy is the best option. And as we saw in the introduction presentation, giving a summary of what has been discussed now, we are fully aware of the different waste streams and specifically looking at the different technologies for energy harnessing. Liquid fuel production, I think with the current prices of liquid fuels around the world, with the oil price fluctuating as it is and going up relatively high over the last couple of months, that liquid fuel production by ethanol and the likes are starting to be discussed in a bit more of an urgent situation. And there are some bilateral agreements with our colleagues in Brazil looking at this particular area. Our blueprint or our plan for energy in South Africa is referred to as the IRP 29. So that's the Integrated Resource Plan, which looks at a longer-term vision for the country to meet its energy needs. Has got a biomass allocation, but very, very small, which you'll see in the graph, which I'm showing you now. So South Africa is a coal-rich country. We have abundant resources of coal, so you'll see that dominates our energy scene in South Africa. Pump storage, CSP, very small nuclear PV starting to grow, picking up momentum because we have abundant sunlight in South Africa. Gas diesel growing because we have got a situation in South Africa where we need to use open cycle turbines running on diesel to meet our peak demand because we have got a demand deficit on our supply situation, and we have been in a situation where we've had what we refer to as load shedding, but it's rolling blackouts for a couple of years now, on and off. Right now, we're not in a load shedding position, but last week we were, and it comes and goes. As I mentioned, hydro not very big, wind growing, so wind and PV you can see are the two growing areas, and then the rest, which is a very, very small slice of the cake, includes cogeneration, biomass, and things like landfill. So that is a very, in the top sort of left corner, that's a very small sliver of our energy mix in South Africa. So supporting biomass, the work that has happened, South Africa through research and a lot of work, you might have been familiar with some of it with the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa, UKZN, led by Professor Troyes, who is very active in this task team, as well as other universities, together with Synergies and the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy and our Department of Science and Technology and Innovation, have produced a biomass atlas in South Africa. So we're fully aware of where the biomass areas are and the focus areas are. There has been the development of a biomass action plan for electricity production specifically, referred to as BOPEPSA. There's a waste to energy roadmap for South Africa, which is a very strong component of biomass. And then there is regulations in South Africa for biofuels blending, which are nowhere near the Euro standards or anywhere that we see anywhere else in the world. So it is very conservative as opposed to progressive. And there's just some examples of the documentation that you can see below. These documents are there, they're in the public domain, but as I said, they're not getting much traction due to the current priorities in South Africa of just keeping the lights on. So we're fully aware, and South Africa sees the development of biomass has many advantages, which you're all familiar with. But the central, the core to that is the resource beneficiation, which has got its limitations in the South African environment. But on the left-hand side, because we have approximately 90% of our power generation comes from coal-fired power, we are the 12th largest emitter of CO2 emissions in the world. And for a developing country, that's very, very high. And we do see embracing this, as well as the technologies that go with this, as one of the solutions to reduce our emissions. And we've got stringent NDPs, and these were reaffirmed at COP26 in Glasgow last month. And so we do see this as an environmental opportunity. Another very big problem in South Africa is we have around about 42% unemployment. and anything that we do or introduce needs to have a component where we can quantify the jobs that can be created, and that's work that still needs to be done. But then obviously, as mentioned by our colleagues, the waste problem is, I think, something that is affecting all of us worldwide, and that needs to be addressed. And then last but not least, at the top is the technology development. We are net importer of most technologies, and that becomes a problem. We do have localization requirements in our supply chain management processes, especially when it comes to government-supported projects, and we do see that linked to the bottom one of job creation if we can get more of the IP manufactured in South Africa. So as just the opportunities, we're fully aware of them, but as I mentioned up front, bioenergy, the total bioenergy space is not really a significant energy opportunity under consideration right now for immediate implementation. As I said, we're going through rolling blackouts. The immediate priority is to just keep the lights on, and we're doing everything to do that because we all know the economy comes to a standstill when the power's off. And, we have 2-hour, 4-hour, 6-hour schedules on a daily basis when we go into a load shedding situation. So anything that is immediately available, like the burning of diesel for power generation, is what's top of mind right now. And then we have the big renewable program on large scale wind and PV, which attracts direct foreign investment as well. So investment into new technologies, particularly bioenergy, not on the cards. We're not seeing much happen, but we must say top priorities in South Africa right now, due to the situation we find ourselves in, is hydrogen, and particularly green hydrogen, and then storage is a big problem that we address, or big opportunity, not a problem. And there's a lot of work happening in South Africa around these two areas. And I was glad to see how we could, that it was mentioned that in hydrogen, we can combine the whole area of biomass in our hydrogen roadmap going forward. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, South Africa is not at the forefront in this particular area, but definitely looking at opportunities to improve our situation. The work that we've seen will be taken back to our principles, that's our political principles, as well as our private sector partners who can potentially see what this benefit is, an economic benefit and a local economic development. So we will take this back, and we will have recommendations. We're learning a lot from what's coming out of this conference. It's obvious that biomass opportunities need to be developed in South Africa within the current context, and integration with this and the various other priority areas that have been identified as solutions, such as green hydrogen, is of cardinal importance to us, and it will be a huge priority. So that, unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, is about the most I can share from a South African perspective at this stage, but definitely looking forward to learning from our colleagues and the experts in Europe and other countries so that we can move forward in this area. Thank you once again for your time.
Thank you very much, Barry, for this overview. It clearly shows the opportunities, but of course also the limitations you have in South Africa. But of course, there is still the potential of a lot of unused wastes that can be used. And that, of course, part of that at least is also a bioresource that could be utilized. And we'll see how that can be converted. Integrating it into the overall energy system is crucial, as you said. So there are also a lot of questions that we will have to solve. So interesting. We'll discuss it further later on in a panel discussion. Before going to the next poll, we will have one presentation. And this is from another country on the other side of the very sunny equator. So this is India, where Sangeeta Kastur from the Department of Biotechnology from the Ministry of Science and Technology of India will present to us, let's say, the different opportunities of bioenergy, biofuels in India, and also how this will further develop and what we can expect from that. So the floor is for Sangeeta.
Thank you so much, Kees, and good evening to all of you, panel members. So I would request organizers, yes, thank you for the presentation. And it was very nice to hear from the Brazil European perspective and from the South Africa about the opportunities. So that made my job very easy because its biomass opportunities are numerous. And but technologies we need, I would be focusing on the technologies. There is a need for improved performance technologies in order to explore the biomass. Next slide, please. So 10 minutes, I will try to keep the time. So slide, please. Yeah. So let me first stand that India's commitment. India is also committed to pursue the green path, and recently in the COP26 also, India has pledged about the net zero by 2070. But however, India's renewable energy capacity is going to be 500 gigawatt by 2030. And India will meet about 50% its energy requirement from renewable energy by 2030. And the third pledge from these Panchamrit, this is called the 5 commitments that India made. So again, the reduced emissions, carbon emissions would be by 1 billion tons from now till 2030. And India will also reduce its carbon intensity from its economy by less than 45%. And the 5th commitment is that by year of 2070, the India will achieve the target of net zero. So these Panchamrit, these 5 elements are the unprecedented contribution towards the climate action. Next slide, please. And just to give background that many of you are aware, but I'm coming from the ministry, that is Science and Technology, from Department of Biotechnology, where we are trying to promote the innovation technologies in life sciences, biotechnology area, and bioenergy is one of the key areas. So there are multiple schemes, vertical schemes in capacity building, research, development, demonstration, innovation, entrepreneurship, and the policy regulation aspects. So I'm not going to, in the interest, I'm not going to talk about this, but we'll be focusing on bioenergy areas, which is one of the important area. And today's focus. Next slide. Coming to the India's policy and where we are and how we are, promoting the biofuels. The national biofuel policy is about mandate is for 10% by 2022, and earlier it was by 2030, which has now been advanced to 5 years, that is 2025. Currently, this is being produced using the molasses, sugarcane, and other first generation feedstock, where we do have technology which is very clear, very simple. So that currently about 8% ethanol is blended in gasoline, but there are huge opportunities in terms of meeting this target, even 10% and 20% by 2025. So that market is huge. There is an offtake market. We have Indian oil companies which are taking this ethanol, and that is being blended in gasoline. Besides this petroleum and ethylene, there is also potential for CBG, compressed biogas, so which is again 15 million metric tons per annum by 2023. So there is also huge opportunity, but I would say that the challenges are also there. The scattered and seasonal availability of feedstock, commercial viability, and biomass availability. These are the, could you please center next slide, please? There are so we are addressing all these issues. So this is about the more policy or aspect, but coming to the R&D and feedstock and development technologies, the Ministry of Science and Technology has the mandate to develop these technologies, and while developing these, it is very important to have these cost effective. So in order to make, it can't be cost competitive with the fossil fuel, but at least those can be near to the fossil based these fuels, and therefore holistic approach also required in place of in terms of the biorefineries, where we can add more value added products, so that in terms the biofuel prices come down. So that is the mandate, and department has been working in these things. And there is also viability gap funding schemes are also there, because some projects are very high risk projects and very high cost projects. So government is also supporting some schemes in order to explore this biomass and new technologies. Next slide, please. So this is the overall what we are looking at. Sustainability is definitely very important. Our department is also looking at, besides some agriculture residues, we are also trying to look at the sweet sorghum, high biomass sorghum, and other such crops, whether which can be cultivated in drought areas. Because as mentioned by South Africa, the India is also semi-arid region where there is a scarcity of water. So we are also looking at developing newer feedstock which can utilize, which can grow in less water where their irrigation is not sufficient. And also we are developing the some potential biomass using the wastewater. So those are also technologies available. The biomass development, besides this biomass, we are also looking at this next generation biomass, that is micro and micro algae. So that is also opportunities for going towards the next generation feedstock. The challenge for this biomass destruction, that is a very important critical aspect, breakdown of biomass. So it is composed of lignin, cellulose, hemicellulose. So we are also looking at how we can produce the cost-effective enzyme which can easily break down, and in order we can also reduce the cost of second generation ethanol. So we have got good leads, so many center of excellences, they are working on these areas, and hopefully we should be able to address these issues. So there are multiple schemes besides these 2G ethanol. We are also looking at other biofuels, advanced drop-in fuels, and synthetic fuels. Coming to the multiple schemes which I talked, so we have been supporting this, promoting research through Center of Excellence. Department has supported 5 Center of Excellence which are working dedicatedly on this both fundamental as well as translational aspects. And also there are a couple of demonstration projects on 2G ethanol technology. Some of the oil companies are taking up for further commercial plant. Then waste to energy, as you said, there is also a lot of potential in municipal solid waste. So organic fraction, for example, vegetable market, kitchen waste, hotel waste. So that carbon also we are making use of that carbon and converting it to CBG. This is known technology, but however, we are trying to improve this with use of multiple fermentation, different designs, and also how we can optimize the conditions. So these things are being taken. International cooperation is very key to this. So through collaborative approach also we can address all these issues. So there are multiple platforms, Mission Innovation, Biofuture platform and all, which is India is member of these platforms. So we're looking forward to work together in this direction. Next slide, please. So these are some of the focus areas which we are looking at. Cyanobacterial biofuels. So using metabolics and pathway engineering, how cyanobacteria can be utilized, explored for further use of succinic acid, butanol, etc. Those are being researched. As I talked about algal biofuels and algal fermentation and all those things, and bioconvergent technologies for rational engineering and hydrolytic enzymes. So there are some modified enzymes which have been developed at the laboratories, which are being scaled up at pilot scale. Not going to detail, but these are some of the projects from the 5-7 years department has been supporting in different areas of these bioenergy. So there is a lot of opportunities to explore this biomass. And also I would like to emphasize that India has surplus biomass, about 180 billion metric tons. But there is also different usages. So also we need to understand diversification of biomass, how we are best utilizing, how much value addition we could do to this biomass. It's also very important. Next slide, please. These are a couple of facilities created in the bioenergy. So through Center of Excellence or through demonstration projects, state-of-art laboratories, as well as the demonstration projects in field. And some of the projects are in public-private sector mode. So we are also taking into consideration municipal corporation for waste energy projects, that is biomass to vegetable market. If we convert these vegetable market in the decentralized mode, so that would be, there are remote potential and opportunities for bringing in the employment as well as helping the generating the new employment sector in these areas. Next slide, please. So again, these are a couple of other technologies. Today I am sitting in the one place, Goa. There, this plant is at the Goa, where municipal corporation, in collaboration with the municipal corporation, this 5 tons plant has been set up here. So this is using the septage as well as the kitchen waste, hotel waste. This is where there is actually supply chain is very important in this aspect. So all these aspects are important down backward linkages and forward linkages. So these are very important, and sustainability of biomass and how segregation and characterization of biomass is also important. So India, through various agencies, we have also done characterization of biomass, because that also plays key role in technology development, how this can be utilized for carbon utilities as well as the input for the energy. That these are very important aspects. Besides LCA, because already there have been a lot of discussion on LCA. So carbon pricing is coming into price. So these LCAs are very important. Techno-economic analysis and LCA for any technology which we are going to utilize. So these are very important. Now, biohydrogen, as Berry had mentioned, biohydrogen also good potential. So it has to compete with other green hydrogen, clean hydrogen. So there are again challenges, how we can reduce this price, how we can convert this biomass to hydrogen through pyrolysis or many other technologies, or even fermentation technologies are there. So these are key challenges. We need innovative approaches in turning out this biomass to value-added, example, clean gas and other things. Next slide, please.
2 minutes left.
Yeah, I'm closing. So this is one public sector unit. I just wanted to inform members that this is a public sector unit where we are also supporting research and development to the startups and industries. So there is a good mechanisms. Next slide, please. So there are a couple of examples how we have supported this R&D in these bioenergy areas to entrepreneurship incubation centers and demonstration project. Next slide, please. This is, so these are some of the plants, just for example, where in the various waste to energy projects they have been supported. So this is a grant in aid. Also there is a provision to provide loan, but this is grant in aid is given to various R&D institutes from industries. Next slide, please. Coming to the latest development, the KEYS is aware that under the mission innovation, which is the multilateral program in clean energy, India is also founding an active member in that, where the recently the integrated biorefinery mission has been launched, and we are further working on developing this mission for full launch, where it is the goal is to develop and demonstrate cost competitive zero waste integrated biorefineries from residue and other waste, with a target of doubling the quantity of fuels, chemicals, and materials produced from sustainable carbon. So India, and with close collaboration with Netherlands, we are developing keys, working very hard to explore that. And we are also happy that Brazil is also Brazil and European Commission are supporting members, and we also look forward that many other members would join this mission so that we can replace at least 10% of additional 10% of fossil-based fuel with these bio-based fuels and chemicals materials. So there are a lot of opportunities. We need to have policies in place, but at least technologies. Through this mission, we are trying to develop technologies and demonstrate these technologies, and also connect with the other linkages like regulations and market linkages. So this is the, in short, I would like to mention. And next slide, please. I'm not going to detail, but if any other further information is required, so I'd be happy to connect and have one call with this. So this is again another platform. This is a SAP innovation platform for sustainable aviation fuel. This is a collaborative platform which was also launched during the Mission Innovation 6th Ministerial, where this India is collaborating with US. So there are again technological challenges that in the SAF we can play. There is a good opportunity for aviation fuel, and some of the technologies are very aqueous phase reforming, hydrothermal liquefaction, power to liquid. But there are good opportunities that how biomass can be converted to syngas and followed by conversion to catalytic conversion to drop-in fuels and aviation fuel. So in short, I would say biomass, there is a key. Biomass is very useful and very valuable when we need to add more value to this biomass in order to make these biofuel sustainable biofuel. With this, I would thank. Next slide, please. I would these are in summary, this biomass to bioenergy has a great potential in decarbonizing hard-to-reach sector, but greater investments are required in terms of improving innovations and capacity building. And also there are more opportunities for innovative solutions by startups and decentralized energy. This provides an opportunity for countries with the potential to deliver affordable products. And of course, accelerated R&D is very crucial to bridge the innovation gap for low carbon bioeconomy. and collaboration is key, crucial in order to develop this technology advancement at accelerated pace. Next slide. With this, I would thank organizers and IEA compliment for this. This was announced by Prime Minister during Environment Day, that economy and ecology can go hand in hand, thrive together. India has chosen this path, and this advancement, as I mentioned, this 20% ethanol blending was advanced from 2030 to 2025 during this recent last World Environment Day. Thank you very much for your attention, and I would be happy to take any questions, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sangeeta, for your presentation. It gave a very good overview on what is happening in India, all the innovation that takes place there through the Department of Biotechnology. We will go to the poll, and I would like to see the results of the first poll, where you can see where we had a look at the markets, and you can see that the winner for this decade, 2020 to 2030, based on the questionnaire, it's first of all, it's the liquid biofuels, and after that, it's the electricity market. That's where we see, let's say, the fast growing market for bioenergy. I think this is in line with what we have seen so far, but of course also liquid biofuels is growing and a lot has to happen there. So that's what we see. I would like to ask now for the second poll. Is that possible to show the second poll? Yes. So we just looked at the markets. So now the question is, how can we realize this? And so there are several policy measures that can take place. It can be an obligation, it can be prices, it can of course also be a tax on fossil fuels or a carbon tax, and of course also research and development could be supported. So you can make a choice, maximum 2 of what you think is really needed. While you are doing this, we will now move slowly to the next presentation. And this presentation is done by Birger Kerkhoff. Birger Kerkhoff is the head of the International Department Affairs of the Fachagentur für nachwachsende Rohstoffe, FNR. And Birger has been for a long time active in this area. So we are now with the new government that started yesterday in Germany, interested how you see bioenergy in Germany and also what actions are needed to realize bioenergy in Germany. So, Birger, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kees. I hope you can hear me. Unfortunately, my video makes some problems, so I fear you can't see me at the moment. But you can see the presentation, I hope.
We see the presentation, and
okay, so I will try to give a brief overview from the situation in Germany. And to save some time, I'm summarizing the following slides, which will be available on the website just briefly here. So between 1990 and 2020, Germany had a decrease of primary energy production from nearly 15,000 petajoule to 11,700 petajoule. The share of renewable energies increased from 1.3 to 16.5%. Electricity from renewable energy sources increased from 19 terawatt hours to 250 terawatt hours, and in order of importance, that's wind, biomass, PV, and hydro. And the avoided greenhouse gas emissions by renewable energy sources increased from 28 million tons to 230 million tons of CO2 equivalents, mainly in electricity production. Then, well, if you look into the German energy concept and the targets Germany has, so we have significant climate goals with to have minus 55% greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, and well, to have an increasing share of renewable energies, to improve energy efficiency. And so in this concept, which is from 2019, it was for the renewable energy shares, it was 30% by 2030, 60% by 2050. For energy efficiency, it was 50% increase by 2050. Then, and also raising the final energy productivity, well, with a couple of measures then. Well, since then, actually, well, a lot has happened already. So encouraged by the Constitutional Court of Germany, the government has strengthened the climate targets in the Climate Protection Law 2021. So already by 2030, we have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 65%, by 2040, by 88%. Germany has the ambition to become net carbon neutral by 2045 and carbon negative by 2050. What is important is that there are sector-specific annual targets, and the government has to take mandatory actions when these specific targets are missed. And on this slide, you can see, or let's say, what has happened with the greenhouse gas emissions over the last 30 years. So for the different sector, energy, industry, transport, buildings, agriculture, and waste management. And you can see that there have been significant decreases, but you can also see on this slide that until 2050, there's still a long road to go. And there further really significant decreases have to be made then. And here you can see this again, and you can see the trajectory for the different sectors. And for example, if you look at the energy sector in yellow on the top, where it stands in 2020 and where it has to stand in the year 2030, so in 9 years' time, that's really a major effort which has to be taken here then. And I think it's a bit similar for the other sectors. I would just mention the transport sector, which I think is not doing so well over the last 30 years, which has been more or less stable then. And now it's expected that between from 150,000 million tons of CO2 equivalents, it has to decrease to 85 million tons by 2030, so within 9 years. So that will be quite a challenge. But there are different, similarly, challenging targets for the other economic sectors then. So what actions are needed? As I mentioned, the climate and energy targets are very ambitious. There are other, well, agreements which are supporting these targets or make it a bit more complex. So Germany, for over 10 years ago, has decided to phase out nuclear energy by the year 2022, so next year. And so it has also decided to phase out coal already in the 2020s and lignite by 2038 at the latest, which leads to a huge contribution of fluctuating energy sources in the German energy system. As I mentioned, we have so far limited greenhouse gas reduction in transport, and it's also very obvious that this greenhouse gas reduction will be required in all economic sectors then. So what is the role of bioenergy then in this whole game? Well, in 2020, bioenergy accounted for 90% of the renewable energies in transport, 86% of renewable heat, 20% of renewable electricity, and 31% of the greenhouse gases avoided by renewable energy sources. If you look what Germany plans to do in the next decade or so, you can see that the expansion targets, there are significant expansion targets for onshore and offshore wind, for PV, but there is no real expansion targets for biomass. So it's at the moment, it's around 9.3 gigawatt, and by the year 2030, it will be around 8.4 gigawatts then. And those expansion targets, they will be even more extended by the new government, which came into force yesterday. So this 100 gigawatt for photovoltaic for 2030 mentioned here. The aim of the coalition is 200 gigawatt by 2030, and also for offshore wind, which so far is 20 gigawatts by 2030. So they want to have 30 gigawatt now by 2030 and 70 gigawatt by 2045 then. So what does this mean for biomass? So biomass or bioenergy has a decreasing role for renewable electricity production, as wind and PV are more competitive by now. However, we have the challenge of this fluctuating electricity production where bioenergy could play a key role. Well, for transport, biofuels are the only option with immediate major greenhouse gas impact. So as they can be used in the whole existing car park. While in the medium term, there's a strong competition with electrification of transport with synthetic fuels and with hydrogen. For the heat sector, we have the challenges of stricter emission limits and also the sustainability requirements for biomass. And I think a couple of these issues have been mentioned in previous presentations, especially by Luc, who highlighted the different sessions of the conference before. And finally, and equally important, is the public perception issue. So we have still the food versus fuel discussion. We have a very active forest bioenergy discussion, as we have also this next workshop tomorrow then. And we have the general NIMBY syndrome, not in my backyard, which is valid for all renewable energy. So that's not bioenergy specific, but that holds true for all the others as well. So what is needed to accelerate developments and deployment? So I think what is important is to exploit the strengths of bioenergy in flexible energy systems. So be it the electricity system, the gas system, or also the transport fuel system. It's also important to use synergies between biomass-based and electricity-based renewable fuels. So that's the so-called SynBioPTX approach. Then it's important to have a sustainable biomass strategy for all uses, so not only bioenergy, but also material uses. And that's, I think, also a general wisdom. A predictable, supportive, and consistent framework would be really important. And finally, and I think there's also a role for IEA Bioenergy to play there, is to increase public acceptance by providing fact-based information really about, let's say, what's the facts behind the different technologies and also the potentials they have. So that's just to give you an example what happens or how bioenergy adapts to the flexibility in the electricity system. You can see that the installed capacity has increased over the last years, but the actual production of electricity from bioenergy is more or less stable since 2015. So that means because we have to accommodate more electricity from wind and PV, and so when there's a lot of wind and PV, biomass electricity production is reduced. To show you another example, and that's my only partly German slide here in this presentation, that's the biomethane potential in Germany by 2030. So I think we could replace something like more than 30% of the current natural gas consumption in Germany from biomethane at the moment. So that's equivalent to 36 billion cubic meters. And well, in the year 2019, we had 1 billion cubic meters biomethane. So I come to my conclusions. So the energy and climate transition is a very complex and demanding endeavor. Germany has ambitious climate and energy targets. I think it's really crucial, and that has been mentioned before, to take a system approach, which is needed both for the energy sector and the bioeconomy sector. So not looking only at bioenergy alone. Then for all renewables, but also for bioenergy, we have a couple of technical and non-technical hurdles to be overcome. And I think if you look at these ambitious targets, bioenergy has a key role to reach these targets. And 2030, it's not far away when you think about investment times and all this. So it's just 9 years. Well, and as you may know, we have a new government since yesterday, and which has new ideas and priorities, and where climate protection, I think, is priority number 1 of the new government. So I have mentioned some of the increased targets already, but this holds true more or less for all activities which can have an impact on climate protection. I think you will see more from Germany in the next couple of months. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Birger. Indeed, we live in challenging times, and with the targets from your new government, we will see what is going to happen and also how bioenergy can be integrated into this overall system. We'll come back to that later on in the panel discussion. In the meantime, there are several questions in the Q&A. So I invite the speakers to have a look at the questions, and if they can answer specific questions for them already in the Q&A, then we don't have to discuss that during the panel session. So thank you very much. We'll go now to the next presentation, and we will even go more up north. So it's now really going into the very cold and snowy, maybe Sweden, where Jonas Lindmark, who is a program manager from the Swedish Energy Agency, will present to us how Sweden is developing bioenergy, the role for biomass in Sweden, and also maybe some of the hurdles or the opportunities. So the floor is to you, Jonas.
Thank you very much, Case. So we'll try to be brief if I can, or at least get to the point. So I think to start, I think Sweden is coming to this area from a slightly different point. First of all, I would like to say something about the Swedish climate national targets to give an overview. So already in 2030, there is a target to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from the transport sector by 70%, which means that biofuels will probably need to be an important part of that. But then also for 2040, there's a target of 100% renewable electricity, and there is a target for no net emissions of greenhouse gases for 2045. So the targets are very ambitious, and bioenergy definitely has a role in many places here. So just to give some historic background, biofuels has been an important part of the Swedish energy mix for a long time, especially since 1991, when there was a CO2 tax introduced, which really changed the whole heat and power sector significantly. So basically at the moment we have almost no fossil in heat or power at all. There's 1% or something like that, but it's basically phased out. And also there's a lot of biofuel use in the industry. So but in the transport sector, there's significant amounts of fossil fuel still used. So I will talk a little bit about what opportunities we see going forward from this point. So in transport biofuels, there's definitely a lot of opportunities. We have a reduction quota system for gasoline and diesel, where there's a mandate to blend biofuels into gasoline and diesel, which is really important. And that so far that has led mostly to blending with the HVO, so with the hydrogenated oils. But we believe that feedstock resource is quite limited in the bigger scale. So there will be a need to use new technologies and use also forestry raw materials of different kinds. And also this reduction quota has been expanded from this year to also include aviation fuels. So from this year, there's a mandate of 0.8%, which isn't much, but it's a start, and it will be ramped up. Then an important question for biofuels and bioenergy use in Sweden is what will happen to these combined heat and power plants that are already there? How will they manage in a situation where the most of the expansion of renewable electricity comes from wind power with quite low costs? And there one important opportunity is of course bio-CCS, where we see a lot of activity at the moment. There's one company which has run a demo plant for quite a long time, and they have now recently been granted funding from the European Innovation Fund to build a plant. And our agency has also presented a proposal for a reverse auction system for bio-CCS. So there could be funding for that kind of plant, and we see about 10 more CHP plant companies that are looking into bio-CCS as a sort of another income stream from their activities. And also based around these CHP plants, we also see a lot of activities looking at how to find new business building on the existing infrastructure, because these plants that produce both heat and power have a lot of heat demand in winter, but during the summer the utilization is quite low, so there's openings to do something more with these plants. So a lot of companies are looking into integration of pyrolysis or gasification into those plants, or other possibilities to produce more products than just heat and power. So I think there's a lot of opportunities in that field, and also in the general integration in the energy system that is being built now around a lot of solar and wind, but also hydrogen that will probably be important in Swedish industry, and how could these interact, and where is the place for bioelectricity and CHP plants in that system. That's still a little bit uncertain, but there's a lot of investigation going on. So I think that echoes a lot of what Luke said in his last slide about the flexibility and how to get paid for being flexible in electricity production. I think that's really important to not only expand biofuels use, but also to keep the existing biofuels use in heat and power, so they will not be out-competed too easily. So I think the challenges that we see mostly in transport is a question of getting investments in biofuels, even though there's obviously a demand and there's a quota for use of biofuels. The policy conditions are still a little bit uncertain on the EU level, and there's these questions of sustainability are definitely discussed, and what is good forestry, and what and how should the forests be managed long term. So some things that are needed are definitely more information from IEA about sustainability and forestry and greenhouse gas balances and so on, but also what Luke said last about how these combinations of technologies are important. And it's not just a question of finding the best technology, but how they complement each other and can build a working, sustainable, renewable energy system together. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. To all of us, Sweden always has been the example of where you developed bioenergy in a lot of combined heat and power plants rapidly, and it's really the way you have shown how to make your system more sustainable with renewable, let's say, energy from biomass always has been a good example. Now we can see that you are also looking at how to integrate it and how to get more profit out of this biomass. So that will be an interesting discussion. We'll come back to that later when we are in the in the panel discussion. Thank you very much for your presentation, because we will now move a little bit more south again, a little bit warmer, to Spain, where Francisco José Domínguez Pérez will present to us about the situation in Spain. So Francisco is from the Bioenergy and Waste Department from IDAI. IDAI is the Institute for the Diversification of and Saving Energy in Spain. And so Francisco will explain to us how bioenergy can develop and also what is needed to make this happen in Spain. The floor is yours, Francisco.
Yeah, thank you, Kees. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the kind invitation to participate in this closing panel of the IEA Bioenergy Conference. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm going to give an overview of the expected development of the bioenergy sector in Spain over the next years, with a view to reach carbon neutrality in the long term. And I will also present the main actions intended to drive such development. Next slide, please. So the context for actions in Spain is the EU framework. On the one hand, we have the Union 2030 Energy and Climate Framework, which establishes a binding target to cut emissions by at least 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. And on the other hand, we have the Renewable Energy Directive, so the RED II. The RED II establishes the share of energy from renewable sources in the gross final consumption in 2030 should reach 32%. The share of renewable energy within the final consumption of energy in the transport sector by 2030 should reach 14%. And there's another target for advanced biofuels and biogas, which is the 3.5%. Next slide, please. So all member states are required to submit a National Integrated Energy and Climate Plan, which is known as an ECP, including renewable energy targets that the member state foresees that will be reached in the period 2021 to 2030. And the plan must also describe the measures intended to achieve those targets. As for general targets, the Spanish NECP states that a 42% share of renewable energy will be reached in 2030, which is a quite high share in comparison with the EU minimum goal, which is 32% that we have seen. As regards the share of renewable energy in transport, according to the Spanish NECP, this share will reach 28% in 2030. That is twice the minimum required in the RED II, which is 14%. And the main contribution to this share is expected to come from biofuels and biogas for transport, although renewable electricity will also become more and more relevant. And with regard to advanced biofuels, according to the Spanish NECP, in 2030, the mandatory target set in the RED II will be slightly exceeded and a share of 3.7% will be reached. Next slide, please. Well, regarding the specific targets for bioenergy, this slide shows the expected evolution for gross electricity generation from biogas and biomass. In the case of biogas, it is expected that generation will increase from 800 gigawatt hour in 2020 to more than 1,200 gigawatt hour in 2030. And in the case of biomass, it is expected that generation in 2030 will more than double the current production with a sharp growth from 4,700 to more than 10,000 gigawatt hour in 2030. Next slide, please. As regards biofuels and biogas for transport, this slide shows the expected evolution in the period 2020 to 2030. As I have said before, according to the plan, the mandatory target for advanced biofuels in the RED II will be slightly exceeded. Will reach 3.7% in 2030, which means a large increase because the current consumption of this kind of biofuels is quite low in Spain. According to the NECP, another share of 1.7% will come from biofuels produced from used cooking oil and animal fats, which means that the limit established in the RED II for biofuels produced from this kind of feedstocks will be reached. And finally, the share of biofuels produced from food and feed crops will remain stable throughout the decade, slightly under 7%, which is the limit established in RED II for this kind of biofuels. Next slide, please. Well, in order to achieve these targets for bioenergy, the NECP includes several measures. And in addition to the ones that I have included in this slide, the NECP has other cross-cutting measures which aim at increasing renewable energy deployment in general. For instance, there are some measures intended to promote the development of new facilities for renewable electricity production, or measures intended to increase self-consumption with renewable energies. And of course, bioenergy has a role in all these cross-cutting measures. But nevertheless, in this slide, I will show measures which refer specifically to bioenergy, or in some cases, measures which are cross-cutting, but a special focus on bioenergy is considered in the implementation. And that's the case of the first measure in the slide, which is related to the promotion of renewable energy in industry. Of course, other renewable energy sources are considered in this measure, like solar, for instance, but the NECP highlights the relevant role that biomass and biogas can have. And in these measures, support mechanisms and aid programs intended to facilitate the industry transition to less carbon-intensive processes are proposed, with a focus on biomass and biogas. There is also a measure aiming at the development of renewable energy for thermal uses. As in the previous case, the measure applies to other renewable energy sources, but the role of bioenergy is very relevant. In particular, actions intended to promote the use of biomass in buildings and in district heating are proposed within this measure. The plan also includes a specific measure for biofuels for transport. In order to reach the mandatory target for advanced biofuels, this measure includes the implementation of support programs for investment in advanced biofuels production facilities, but also actions to promote biofuels in general, like the biofuels consumption mandate. And I want to underline that these measures foresees specific actions to promote biofuels in aviation. And related to this, I have to say that this year, a law on climate change and energy transition was published in Spain, and it includes an article related to the establishment of biofuels targets with a special focus on targets for aviation biofuels. The NECP has another measure for renewable gases. Of course, it includes actions intended to promote hydrogen, but also the relevant contribution of biogas and biomethane is underlined. And both the NECP and the law on climate change and energy transition that I have mentioned state that support mechanisms to promote the development of these renewable gases should be implemented. The next measure in the slide refers to actions intended to facilitate the management and use of biomass. The goal of this measure, besides energy production, of course, is also to revitalize rural areas and to mitigate the risk of the population. And so this measure envisages legislative and economic actions intended to support activities throughout the whole biomass value chain. And finally, the plan has a measure on the GHG emissions reductions in waste management. And again, biogas and biomethane production is considered to have a key role in this field, and thus support mechanisms and regulatory actions are foreseen to foster biogas and biomethane production from municipal waste, for instance. And as I have said before, there are many other measures in the plan which are cross-cutting and which, of course, will also have an impact on bioenergy deployment. But for instance, regarding research and development, there are no specific measures for bioenergy in the plan. I mean, there are no specific R&D measures for advanced biofuels, for biogas, and so on and so forth. But the development of these technologies is considered among R&D needs for aviation biofuels, for instance, and a generic measure intended to facilitate the launch of actions identified in the set plan implementation plans is also included in the NECP. So next slide, please. And yeah, to conclude, I want to comment that last year it was published the Spanish long-term decarbonization strategy 2050. The goal of the strategy is to reach climate neutrality by 2050, and this document is consistent with the NECP, and it sets the pathway to reduce GHG emissions in this period. As regards bioenergy, in the strategy, some synergies between forest management, the forest issue has been already mentioned, some synergies between forest management and bioenergy production are identified. And for instance, it is stated that, of course, bioenergy production from forest management can contribute to decarbonization, but also to fire prevention and to rural development. And what I want to highlight is that, as stated in the strategy, bioenergy can contribute to environmental, economic, and social aspects, as well as to decarbonization. While in the strategy, an assessment of different sectors is carried out in order to determine how decarbonization can be reached in each of them. In transport, biofuels and biogas will have a key role. It's also expected a relevant contribution of renewable gases. In agriculture, it is considered that biogas production can largely contribute to circular economy since it encompasses energy production and fertilizer production if the digestate is properly treated. And as already said, biogas and biomethane production are expected to have a key contribution to the decarbonization of waste management sector. And regarding biogas, just to close my presentation, the strategy envisages the development of a biogas roadmap. A draft document was already published last summer for public consultation, and the assessment of comments received is ongoing. So I hope soon this biogas roadmap with specific measures for the deployment of biogas in Spain will be published. And that's it. This was my final slide. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Francisco, thank you very much for this overview of what's happening in Spain. I think what we have seen this afternoon is a lot of countries are, let's say, developing policies, are implementing policies, but we all do it in a different way. And so let's first have a look now at the poll, the results of the poll number 2, where we have asked you, what are the most important measures to support biomass implementation? So the most important one that has come out of this poll, it is the carbon tax. And next to that, it's just a little bit a winner. It's the support for research and development. So to bring down the cost price, to make it more competitive, that is seen as the next one. So before going to the plenary discussion, I would like to give you the poll number 3. And poll number 3 asks you, indeed, of course, innovation is important as well. But in what area? Should it be on the biomass production side? So how can we source it? How can we, let's say, the supply chain? Or should it be on conversion processes, on biorefineries, so that we can integrate it into the industry? Or should it be on formulation of bio-based products and chemicals? So that's, let's say, the new market for biomass that can be developed. So where do you see is most research required, let's say, in the next year? Where would you like to put the priority? So it's up to you to answer this. And I would now like to ask all panelists to come on the screen. So, yes, there is one. Jonas is there. Okay. Is everyone on the screen?
But my camera doesn't want. I will switch off.
Your name is there. Birger, your name is there.
Okay.
Okay, so let's say there have been several questions also in the Q&A. I don't know. So what I got out of all these presentations is that I see 2 main issues that I would like to discuss with the panel. And after that, I will also ask Luc if there are specific other questions in the panel that need to be answered as well. I think what we see from the panel, from the different remarks, is that sustainability is crucial. Even though we are working on this for a long time, it is still an issue for many people, how to treat bioenergy and bioresources in a sustainable way. And the second one is, let's say, integration, flexibility, coming up with the new, more sustainable energy system with the let's say, renewable sources, the variable renewable sources. How can we integrate bioenergy into this? What is our place, and how can we develop that in the best way? I see that as two central issues that have come out, and so I would like to discuss that with the panel. And maybe about sustainability. This was also a question in the Q&A. The question was to Renato. You have a very ambitious goal. It's 2.5 times more bioenergy in Brazil, but can this be done in a sustainable way?
Thank you, Kees. This is a very important question, and a question that I'm very happy to address. And I invite participants that haven't done that to go into the Q&A system, because I did put a lot of information there on biomass sustainability practices and regulations in Brazil, based on this question by Hans Werner Gress. So there is a lot of detail there, much more than I can go into here live. So, but it is there in the Q&A system. I invite you to go on the specifics. But in short, I think there is an elephant in the room, which many people are getting acquainted with, even by the media, that there is recent deforestation increases in Brazil and the Amazon. And the point that I wanted to bring is that there are specific drivers for that kind of deforestation related to illegal practices in the border and people that want to claim land and land tenure in an unsustainable way, and deficiencies in control by the proper agencies. So all of those drivers are not and never have been related to proper, sustainable, modern biomass production and management in Brazil. So this has been something that was clearly established. And for many years, especially when the bioenergy production had a huge growth that I showed in the slides, the historical growth, at the same time, deforestation has been strongly reduced to very low levels, all the while bioenergy production increased and food production increased. So this link that people sometimes can establish based on uninformed common sense on that biomass is necessarily linked to negative land use, change, and deforestation is simply not true. And this has been recognized even by the Joint Research Center from Europe while examining the LCA potential of sugarcane and bioplastics in recent reports. So there is minimal influence on this kind of driver. And I have been able to go through the many laws and regulations and programs and incentives in Brazil, especially the Renova Bio program that I mentioned here, provides incentives and takes producers to more and more sustainable practices of protection. So we think that this modern use of biomass done in a sustainable way with proper controls is something that increases sustainability of farm production in general, instead of compromising it. So a lot of the increase that we projected and I showed you is really without the introduction of new technologies and more optimization, without any land expansion. So as you mentioned in your presentation, these assumptions and creating a convergence around what has to be done to provide this sustainability around the world, and how much biomass can be quantified under those restrictions that we can rely on from bioenergy. This is something that the world needs more agreement on, and hopefully the BioFuture platform can help. As you mentioned, this. They are starting the work stream. Luke also mentioned it with IA Bioenergy and the network of scientists help to create more convergence around these assumptions.
Okay, thank you very much, Renato, for this answer. Is there one of the other panelists that would like to add on this question of sustainability? I do not hear any other person raising its voice. So then I would like to go to the other issue, that is the integration and flexibility. We're looking forward for, let's say, greenhouse gas reduction. We are looking for new renewable energy technologies. And so the question is, how can we bioenergy, how can we integrate that in this overall energy system? And so my question to the panelists is, can we, from, let's say, the bioenergy point of view, can we be leading or should we follow? Yes, so is it, let's say, the other renewables that define the overall energy system and we are trying to find a place for bioenergy? Or could it be the other way around? Could we come up with solutions where bioenergy are crucial, but also where we integrate it into the other systems? May I give one of our panelists the floor to this? So maybe from Jonas from Sweden, you are very active in this area to see how that can be integrated. How do you see this? Who is in the lead?
I think in the Swedish system, I think since a lot of combined heat and power plants are already there, and for example, wind is growing rapidly, I think that the bioenergy is sort of already in the lead a little bit. Mm-hmm. But I think also it's important to mention that these CHP plants are usually, many of them are owned by municipalities, and they are sort of have a local perspective, so they are a center of something that can then be built on, for example, to expand with hydrogen or with electrification of different kinds. So I think from our perspective, I think we are starting in many cases from, and also companies that are already active in CHP that are also getting into wind and solar. So it might be different in other countries.
Yeah, because let's go to Germany. Birger, how is that in Germany?
Well, I would love to state that bioenergy is in the lead, but I fear that's no longer the case in Germany. And I think we have, let's say, a more fundamental discussion about the role of bioenergy in the energy system, and also among the scientists. So there are, two positions, and one says, yes, there is an important role, and the other says, well, we can easily decarbonize without bioenergy. I think looking at the statistics I have also shown, to me personally, I think it's rather obvious that there is indeed a role for bioenergy, and it has a crucial role in this. And it's one thing to make, let's say, forecasts and nice scenarios, and the other thing is to implement this in real world, because I think Barry has pointed this out. Well, a stable electricity net, that's really something of paramount importance. And I think we are used to this, to have this 365 days a year, every hour. So we don't want to compromise on this. And I think bioenergy has an important role there.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I also noted that in your slide you showed the gigawatts of bioenergy remained about the same. So I was then asking myself, what about aviation fuels? Is there no one who wants to fly in the future from Germany?
Yes, but there was a political decision made that sustainable aviation fuels, and the German definitions are no advanced biofuels. They do not include advanced biofuels, so it's only electrofuels. And so we have nice projects here, also international projects. I think, for example, one with Chile, which goes in this direction. But I think the policy priorities is unfortunately not to include advanced biofuels there. which
Okay.
will make it very difficult to achieve, I have to say, and expensive.
So ask these people to go to our aviation session, that we had from IEA Bioenergy last week. So they will find a lot of additional information there.
Can I
So
touch on
Luc.
this case? Just we had an interesting presentation from Maersk from Denmark. They were also looking into if in our fleet we have to convert our fuel consumption by e-fuels, we would need 6 times the current electricity production from Denmark. So I think that translation also needs to be made, that there's no unrealistic expectations.
It's not realistic, Okay, so there is still, so let's say on flexibility and integration, we see the need to do this, but we also see that a lot of, let's say, people, even scientists, have different perspectives, and we have to find a more common sense on these perspectives and get the right data on the table so that we know what to do. Luc, you are now on my screen. Did I miss any question from the Q&A? What questions did you see in the Q&A?
Well, there's only a few. I think one interesting also is the future of biomethane. I think in many cases biogas was put as an interesting option. Do you see a role for biomethane in the transport sector? Low duty or heavy?
A question to who?
Anyone,
General.
I think,
Okay, Birger, Germany, and then we'll go to Brazil. Is the biomethane going to play a role there as well?
Well, I think probably not for passenger cars, and because I think there's a push is very strongly for electrification there. But I think for heavy duty transport, I think biomethane could play a role. Right? Yes. A clear yes, and I think the sustainability and efficiency of biomethane as a fuel is very positive. So I think there are strong arguments also in favor of biomethane.
Okay, thank you. And how is this in Brazil? You have so much bioethanol. Is there still a role for biomethane?
Yes. So I try to stress in my presentation how biogas is the fastest growing and the higher potential for growth, and biomethane is a part of it. So there is in Brazil a lot of cars that have been modified to use liquid natural gas. And in this Future Fuels program, one of the pathways that people are studying is how to integrate biomethane into the network for liquid natural gas, also in the distribution pipelines, so that they can leverage this. And we have also Sweden here in the panel, and Scania has started producing multi-fuel trucks that can use diesel with biodiesel and biomethane indistinctly in the same truck. So I've seen them in Brazil, and they are studying already being commercialized using liquefied natural gas and biomethane indistinctly, and there is a heavy bet that this will be important in the heavy duty transport, and even in these modified car fleets and municipal buses already running with biomethane here and painted and displaying this. So it's definitely something that we look forward in Brazil.
Thank you. So Barry, for South Africa, do you think you have all these wastes? Could the biomethane play a role in South Africa as one of the bioenergy options in South Africa?
It's definitely, and there has been some research around that and some pilot projects, and in the transport sector, very small scale, using definitely on the large scale or heavy duty vehicles. I must say the hype right now in South Africa is sort of leapfrogging directly to hydrogen fuel cell type technologies. So that's what everyone's talking about. So the others tend to fall by the wayside, but there's definitely, we have to increase the options in our energy mix because of the current situation. And it is something that where there is some preliminary results, we just have to build on that going forward.
Okay. Thank you. And for Sankita in India, is biomethane also playing a role there in the picture of, let's say, transport fuels?
Yes, there is a huge opportunities for biomethane, basically using this bioorganic waste from the municipal waste. So, and instead of currently that is being supplied for power, but because there are a lot of other sources, solar and wind, so it is better options to go into clean cooking fuel as well as the transport. There is good opportunities for those things. So existing infrastructure pipeline can be utilized for this.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you. So Francisco, you are still developing a roadmap for biogas. Could this play a role also in Spain?
Yes, definitely. It could play a role for the biomethane for transport could play a role. And we also want to promote the biogas for thermal uses. And yeah, definitely it can have a role. I agree with Birger that maybe not for passenger cars, but for heavy duty vehicles, and which are difficult to electrify because electrification is growing in passenger cars in the coming years, but definitely biomethane and other biofuels will have a role for transport and especially for heavy duty vehicles, and other biofuels also for aviation and maritime, as already has been said.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I think this brings us to the end of this webinar. Yes, we still have to see the results of the final questions, yes? Where we asked, yes, in which field do we need most of the research? So according to the audience here, it's quite evenly distributed, let's say two less, so less logistics and chemicals, but a lot on the, let's say, biomass production, conversion processes, and biorefineries. So that's let's say the focus for research and development. And luckily, this is all, let's say, part of the IEA biotechnology program. We have tasks on all these issues where we can cover this. So I think we have discussed this afternoon the different priorities, the different needs for, let's say, policies, also how to integrate bioenergy in the overall energy system, what you expect also from IEA Bioenergy, how to help you on sustainability and on realizing, let's say, the integration of bioenergy in the flexible system. This is something we will have to work on further and where IEA Bioenergy will continue. So I want to thank all the speakers this afternoon for your, let's say, excellent presentation, for the discussion. I also want to ask the audience also for asking your questions, for participating in this meeting. And especially I want to ask Luc Pelkmans, who has organized all this and made this excellent overview of what has come out of this session, and also to Eta Florence, who has done all the technical support to make this happening. So please give them all a warm applause for all the work that they have done. Thank you. Yes. So with that, I close this session now, and I don't know if there is any final remark from anyone, but the time is over. So if there is anything, we will go now to this so-called
thank you so much, Kees, for your excellent moderation.
Thank you. No, but we will now go to the special space that is also put into the chat, yes, where you can have the link wonder.me. So we will now go to wonder.me, and you can continue the discussion over there if you want. If not, then the show is over and we have to go back to work, and we'll develop more bioenergies. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you, Alan.
Goodbye.
Thank you, IE.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.